karaoke song. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, thank you. Welcome to a beautiful day here at Excel. I'm so privileged to be hosting today's sessions and the main stage here for the 10th edition of Event Tech Live. And it's so nice to see so many familiar faces, but also to welcome anybody who's never been to the show before. My name is Katie Watley. I'm the Group Head of Marketing at Explory, and I have been to many Event Tech Live, so I know the show pretty well. When I was asked whether I'd host, I immediately said yes. First of all, I love this event, and as I said, I've had a privilege of attending most of the 10 editions. But secondly, it gives me the opportunity to sit on some amazing sessions. What can you expect? You can expect a brilliant session on the hour, every hour for the entire day. The sessions will be 45 minutes long. There'll be lots of chance to ask questions as we go along. Most of the panelists and the chairs invite you to ask questions. This is a really interactive sessions. We've got some of the biggest names in event technology, some gurus, Will Curran, and legendary CTO Stefan Fossai. We've got the head of Zoom Events, Stephanie Barnett, and Tim Groot, the CEO of Matchmaking, all hosting panels or keynote sessions throughout the day. So before we get going on the first session, just a bit of housekeeping. The headsets are the best way to enjoy the session. And this year we are offering simultaneous interpretation. Sorry about my Medway accent, everybody. But if you'd like to enjoy the session in another language, simply press the red button on your headset and it will switch different channels. And I think we've got Spanish, French, and Italian, I believe. If you'd like to ask any questions, please simply scan the QR code. We're using Pigeonhole today and put in ETL 2023. For this first session, we'll be having a Q&A session towards the end, and we'll allocate around 10 minutes for questions. So make sure you get yours in. So without any further ado from me, I'm going to hand over to our first panel chair, Napier Andrews, Senior Director and Head of the Collective at BCD Meetings and Events. Megan, over to you.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? We didn't actually test these microphones ahead of time, so it sounds good. So yeah, thank you for joining our session today. Nice to see some familiar faces in the group. Today our session will be focusing on technology that will really amplify your event strategy, help you better understand your attendee behavior and how you can use that data, as well as some current event production strategies that we're seeing in trends. Obviously, as Katie just mentioned, I'm Napier Andrews, your moderator for the session, and I have the honor of introducing my colleagues from across the US and the UK and our panel of experts for today. So Julie, would you like to start?
Yes, of course. Morning, everybody. My name's Julie Yorke. I am also a Senior Director at BCD, looking after the Delegate Management Division, so very much interested in management of the registration process and on-site experience.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Patrick Ockendon. I'm the Client Development Director for The Collective. My focus as a Client Development Director is about designing and creating creative experiences for clients that are on brand, aligned to the event objectives, and I think technology can play a huge part in that role of aligning that experience to being on brand, but also tying in with those event objectives.
Hi guys, my name is Taylor Smith. I'm Vice President and Executive Creative Director over the production and content team in BCD North America. So I lead our team of producers and content creators to create event experiences.
Great, thank you guys. And as Katie also mentioned, we'd love your questions, so please submit on the app and we'll take them at the end of the session. But to get us going, tech is a massive and extremely broad topic, as we all know. So, Patrick, what are some considerations that when we're analyzing tech for our events?
I think the technology world we're living in such a fast pace at the moment. It's developing at such a quick rate. So I think us as an agency, it's about understanding what the tech's purpose is in that event experience or that wider event strategy. Is it that we're looking to improve attendee experience? Are we looking at streamlining processes or engaging the delegate experience? And I think one of the key things as well is around about how we provide an ROI and analyse that data that the tech can deliver. So I think that's one of the key considerations. But the other one is about the audience. The key thing, we're all about creating experiences for the audience. It's understanding the audience. We know that we've got big part of those audience could be Gen Z, that we know that embrace technology, early adopters. They're very used to engaging with technology, but then for an older generation, they're perhaps not so much. So I think that's a key thing to play and focus around the audience.
Great, thank you. Julie, when we talk about tech and data and how it drives event strategy and helping us better understand our audience's behavior, what are you seeing in the delegate experience area?
I think we've seen a huge increase in emotion and sentiment mapping over the last couple of years. And I think we've also used a lot of facial recognition, which is controversial, but used a lot for check-in, I think, in a closed environment where you've got an opt-in for a selection on registration. I think that's, it's absolutely fine. But the passive measurement around emotional and sentiment mapping takes away some of that stigma. And I think because it's completely anonymized data and the passive measurement is not intrusive, clients are feeling more comfortable about adopting it. So for me, it's a really powerful piece of technology, and the data that you get from it is really powerful as well. So with some of the stuff that we're doing, we're looking at measuring, demographics of people within an environment. So you can measure, interest, traffic through exhibitions, etc. And I think for me, that real-time data really helps to make changes in real time or in the actual event itself. So we've seen, cases where you've got maybe a motivational speaker that isn't quite so motivational. You can change your program the next day, where you've got sponsors who are quite interested in dwell time and people's emotions and reactions to things on their booths. You can measure that in real time and change things if it's not quite right. You can change the layout of your exhibition to accommodate things. So I think for me, out of all the kind of technology progression that we're seeing, I think that probably has the most return in terms of the valuable data that you get out of it.
Great, thank you. So we've talked about tech for a purpose. We've talked about the data. So Taylor, I'm coming to you for content. When we're trying to understand our attendees and create relevant, powerful, and engaging content, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think for us, it's about making content relevant and meaningful. You're talking about modifying the physical space and the logistics of a booth or a speaker or something, but once we get into a room and we sit down and we're ingesting whatever content that session is, it needs to be relevant, it needs to be tailored, and it needs to be meaningful. Thinking about this 10-year period, let's say 2010 to 2020, where we were doing all of this over-the-top stuff, 007 themed parties for no reason, or, coming up with big opening videos that really just kind of were hype pieces. I think over the past 3 years, we've seen this shift in actually using emotional storytelling in a meaningful way to convey messages. People want to be talked to in a certain way, and I'll use Coachella as an example. So, big music festival happens every year, 3 days. I register as an attendee and I say, here are the bands I'm interested in seeing. And 2 weeks later, I get a physical box mailed to me that has a custom printed lanyard and a little book, a kind of custom personalized agenda that tells me where to go and when and who I can see. And I think as we get older and our clients and customers get younger, that's the level of experience that they're going to expect going into a corporate event. Patrick will talk a little bit about being early adopters and how technology in general starts in consumer marketing advertising worlds, but then 5-7 years later it comes are used to communicating about their product and processes in very certain specific ways, different terminology, different acronyms. And so one mass message communication to all of those people is not going to mean the same thing. So I talk a little bit later about it, but we are approaching content in a really modular way where we can get, with the data that we collect from our attendees, user level meaningful information and then tailor messages specifically to the attendees that are going to mean something.
That makes sense. Thanks, Taylor. So Pat, let's now go to what you're seeing as what's currently trending for production on-site experiences and how it's actually evolving. We've been pitching loads to clients all the time. What are you seeing that's resonating with our corporate clients, and how far our clients are actually willing to push the boundaries?
Yeah, I think at the moment when we look at a lot of the client briefs that we're getting, they're asking for that immersive experience. How are you going to create an immersive experience for their delegates? But it's also inclusive and interactive. And I think there, as Taylor touched on it, the consumer world is early adopters to technology. They're trialing, testing it. Consumers are wanting to embrace that technology and that experience. And it goes back to that tech for purpose. As an agency, we need to look at that technology and see where it has its place within the event experience and strategy. So I think we can learn a lot from how the consumer sector is driving that technology and embracing it and its user cases. But in terms of going back to your question around what we're pitching, what's resonating, I think there's three topics. Now, these aren't brand new technologies, but again, it's linked back to finding the right place to position that technology to deliver that message or align to the objectives. Projection mapping, obviously, we've all seen the Van Gogh exhibition in London, and that's the global exhibition. I think that's a great example of using projection mapping to create that immersive experience. Holograms and digital avatars, it's been hyped up in the past, but now I think it really has a purpose. You only have to look at the ABBA Voyage concert. That's people from potentially older generation that are paying quite expensive money to go and see an experience that is virtual, and I think that's really impactful. So I think there's learnings there that we can take into the corporate world. And then finally, I would say it's soundscaping. If people aren't familiar with it, it's a really great way to elevate audio through your speakers. It creates that multi-sensory experience, an extra dimension, and it's got a really powerful tool. But in terms of the technology, as agencies, there's so much out there. We've got to stay ahead of our game, looking at the tech, finding out, understanding what it can achieve, and then it's working with our creative guys to find out, right, what's the best platform to delivering that content through that tech platform.
You know, it's funny, you mentioned holograms and that whole Voyage experience, and the first thing that comes to mind is the Tupac hologram that happened at Coachella, and 10 years later we're still talking about that, but it still hasn't made it over to, in that form, kind of the corporate event world.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's finding the right place and position, and it all depends in terms of the brands that you're working with, and again, it goes back to who is that audience? Is it relevant for the audience?
Yeah, and so from a content perspective, kind of, again, leveraging that technology, I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind for us that we're starting to see the surface just being scratched with is everybody's favorite buzzword now is AI, right? We've gone from virtual events and now everybody's talking about AI and how it's going to impact, and I think we're seeing just the beginnings of it in the content world. And talk about, you know, emotional mapping, and talk about in-the-room experiences, and kind of breaking down the fourth wall and creating that immersive experience. You know, something that's really interesting that we're starting to do is this idea of real-time content generation based on AI cues in the room. So if you've ever been to a bathroom at an airport, you've got those 3 buttons you press, and good, bad, great. I don't know how many people have ever pressed the great button in a bathroom. I haven't. But, you know, imagine that going into a ballroom, right? You generate a response for the room, and then as you walk in, the lights, the sound, the content on screen is all regenerated in real time based on what that input is. I think too, that's kind of the software piece. There's a hardware piece to it. So you know, Patrick mentioned projection mapping, and watching Notch as a software tool to generate, you know, real-time content using kind of an AI backend. I mean, that goes on screen, that goes on, you know, walls, that goes really anywhere in the room. But the idea is that we're basically creating things in real time, and that's something that's really new and untested. And I'll use an example of some work we did with Acura, where we created a ride and drive experience, and it was called Mood Roads. And you hook up a couple patches here and some here, and basically what we're doing is we're measuring your physical response to what's happening. So if you're nervous, your heart's beating, you're getting a little sweaty, it's measuring that, and then we're recreating a driving experience based on what you're feeling in that moment. And so if you're excited, and your heart's racing, you hear the music bump up and the lights are changing, and everything's kind of reacting in real time. And I think that's one small way that it's being done. I mean, it's being used now, I think, across the whole event experience. One other thing too to kind of talk about is a pre-event experience, and again, it's controversial, and people are talking about artist rights and usability and licensing and all of that. And we actually have an AI ethics team that meets once a month and talks about these really important topics. But you look at it like a tool, like any other tool. It's only as good as the person who's going to use it, right? A hammer is a hammer until a carpenter picks it up and starts, chipping away. But we were doing this stuff already with, building mood boards for a piece of content, a patient story or a product launch. We were already Googling and Getty imaging and all of that stuff. We just now have a more collaborative tool to get us started on the process. So we can build out really quick storyboards, and that's not the end product. We're not selling an AI generated piece of art, but we're using it as a tool to kind of tell a story. So I think it's all new and interesting, and as with any new tool, we're going to use it and see what works and see what doesn't. But I do think a very quick, low barrier to entry, talk about working with customers to kind of be the thought leader and the agency that leads them there eventually. Nothing changes overnight, but a very quick and easy way is right here with translation. So, we're using apps to basically hold up your phone and in real time translate what's happening, caption what's happening, and accessibility is a really quick and kind of low-hanging fruit way to start testing the water of AI and how it could affect the content experience in person.
Great, thanks, Taylor. And I think when we're talking about all of these amazing immersive experiences, I recently went to the Sphere in Vegas to watch U2, which is incredible, really immersive, amazing content. We're really in a really immersive environment right now. What we need to be cognizant of is the other topic, which is neurodiversity, and making sure that people who can get intimidated or just need like a little break away, when we're designing experiences, we are always designing exhibitions and meetings and product launches that have quiet spaces as well for those people that do have neurodiversities and need a break away from all of the noise and the lights and the sound. So we are talking about the big production and the content, but it's just something to keep in mind when we are talking about these things, to keep those people in mind. But Julie, as we've covered event data that drives the design of future event experiences, how are you using the data to keep the life cycle of the event alive between the events?
I think there's two things here, actually. I think there's the joining up of the data and all the technologies that we're using. I mean, I've talked a bit about emotional mapping, and that's in real time as you're at an event, but there's also opportunity to capture data as part of registration, every single process, the touch points of a delegate experience. You're capturing really valuable information, and I think we need to use that to extend the life of an event. It's not just about tweaking on site, as I've been talking about. It's about taking that data and making intelligent decisions about extending the life cycle of an event. And I think in other industries, we're seeing, roles where you've got strategic analysts who are looking at this data and predicting trends and what's going to happen in the future. And that's really, I think, what we're going to see more in events as we go on. And, it's part of our everyday life. We're used to going online and seeing pop-ups of things that we're interested in. Mine's usually shoes and clothes. But, we need to be doing that as part of the event experience as well. And all these technologies that we see allow us to gather the data to be able to do that.
And, that's just talking about, again, extending that event, right? Or learning and iterating for the next version, and we're seeing that in content too. I think one of the biggest things that brands struggle with is how to keep the conversation going in between events, and giving content that is generated for an event a life after that. Nobody wants to spend $10,000 on an opening video and throw it in the trash and never see it again. And one of the questions here, this is kind of interesting that ties in, do you think the pandemic has stalled innovation in creative tech for in-person experiences? So I think, completely honestly, my opinion is that the metaverse and virtual events and all of that as we intended it to be when the pandemic first hit is dead in the water, right? It's not the end-all be-all replacement for events, as is evidenced by all of us still coming out of our homes to be face-to-face and the power of human emotion and all of that. But I think that there are learnings that we can take from that, that maybe the platform in the way we thought it was going to be is stalled, but innovation is growing from that. So I'll use an example. There's an annual event in California called ComplexCon, and it's a big fashion event and art event and kind of culture event. So the pandemic hit, they went virtual. They went into this full metaverse avatar reality that we thought was going to happen all over the place. And then what they were able to do is collect this really specific, unique, interesting first-person data on all of their attendees, something that was never possible other than your F&B requirements in-person events. So essentially they knew Taylor Smith logged in at this time, stayed for this long, he attended these product drops, he watched this amount of content, and these, based on all of that, is what we think are his interests. And so they did 2 years virtually, and then when they came back last year to their first return to in-person, they basically used that data in a way, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, to curate a personalized experience because they knew me. And the crazy thing, to Julie's point, is that all of this data is out there. A lot of these companies are collecting this data, and they're sitting on this data, but they're not using this data in a way that benefits anybody. And so I think maybe the virtual platform in the way we thought it was isn't going to continue to live on, but think about it as maybe a tool to keep the conversation going in between face-to-face touch points. So again, using content outside of events and giving maybe a slow drip of communications throughout the year through a virtual platform where you're gathering this really good data and then you're using that data to build a new strategy and insight for the next in-person event, which is kind of the goal that you're building towards. But I think, like anything else, it's not going to happen overnight. Like Patrick said, it's kind of a process, and it's our job to be identifying what those technologies are, seeing how they can work for us, and then also being flexible. One of the questions on here is budget, and that's always a question, but it's, I think, about being flexible but being smart about it.
So just on that one, Taylor, since you picked up on the budget question, the question that someone has submitted is, do you have any tips for companies who want to use technology to create more immersive events but have a limited budget? Do you want to take that one?
I'll take it, and then you look like you're ready to fire off too, so you'll jump in there. I mean, yeah, I think we have the benefit of time, and over time, any technology will get more affordable, but I also think that there's low barrier ways to feel like you're immersing yourself into an event without having to build a custom piece of technology from the ground up. So I think whenever we present ideas to clients, there's always good, better, best, and it's on us as an agency to be providing versions of that technology at more affordable rates, I guess. But I think if we look at what the technology is, so I'll use LED panels for example, very high density, good quality LED panels used to be very cost prohibitive, but there were ways that you could over time start incorporating them in smaller ways, one step at a time. You're not going to change the whole panel overnight, but could you do side screens with a high density and keep this lower so I think it's about incremental growth and relying on a partner, an expert, to help get you over a 2 to 3 year period where you want to be.
Yeah, there's some really valid points in there. I think one of the key things is about how you're working with your clients and looking at their long-term vision, because yes, tech is quite expensive to invest in, but if you can demonstrate the value in terms of the data and how you're going to use that data, then when you're with those stakeholders and saying, look, I need an extra 10 grand for this, you've got a valid case of saying, but it's going to deliver this long-term and we can utilize it for the next 3 years. That shows real return on investment and investing in the future of that event strategy.
Julie, do you have anything to add? Because I know your area is not always like the cheapest area, but it provides so much value in terms of the data that you're giving your clients. But are there like more cost-efficient solutions in the delegate engagement world?
Yeah, I think there are. I think a lot of it is around the measurement piece, which, you know, we're talking about here, so gathering that for return on investment. But, I mean, there are always, you know, more cost-effective ways of doing things. And actually, you know, I've just seen half a question on there because I can't quite see it all around permissions. You need to get permission to do this, obviously, and opt-in is a big piece. But, you know, collecting that data is probably the most, you know, cost-efficient part of the whole process. You know, you're probably engaging with the technology anyway. So I think, you know, it's thinking a bit more strategically about it.
I think, too, there's a benefit there, again, talking about that consumer to corporate adoption rate over a period of time. You know, on my flight here, on Delta, I walked up, they scanned my face, boarding door opened, I walked in and I didn't think twice about it, you know. So I think that barrier, again, is slowly starting to kind of come down a little bit, and what our expectations are, of course, with the right disclaimers and, you know, privacy policies and all of that. I think we're becoming more used to things in the real world, and it's just sometimes going to take a little bit more time for it to get adopted comfortably here.
I think there's an expectation that that's the experience now as well. I mean, I think if someone gave you a kind of paper ticket to do something with, you'd kind of question whether they were sane. So I think, yeah,
and that goes with preferences too. On the app, you know, Delta knows that I like an aisle seat and that I like, you know, soda water with lemon or something like that. And I expect that type of personalized experience out in the world. And so how do we bring that into here in a way that doesn't make people feel uncomfortable for some reason?
Okay, I also can't see the question, so I'm going to stand up. We're the first session, so they're going to have to shift that afterwards. But we've touched on keeping the conversation going between events. Does anyone want to go into a bit of a deeper dive on that and how to keep it going?
Yeah, so I'll use an example. We work with a customer, one of the largest med device companies in the world, and they do an annual sales meeting to kick off in January and getting their salespeople ready for the year. And so it was always this big, okay, we build up, we do this big event, and then we say, see you next year, and then there was nothing. So what we've done is we've created this online portal. They had an intranet tool, and we kind of bolted onto the top of that, where every 2 months or so, we do a drop of content, and that could be video content. We could release short story patient stories and doctor interviews where we're talking about how this product is benefiting people in their lives. We could do a white paper piece co-authored with the client themselves who talks about you know, the research and benefits and all of that. So it's kind of like it's giving them a place to go where they can see related, personalized content, but not just as it relates to the event. It relates to them, but it's a way for them to go somewhere to consume content in between events.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, and that as an agency, we've got to ask those questions of our clients and understanding all of their different channels of communications, because there might be a nugget of gold over here that we might not know about that we could tap into, or reusing content to push through that channel. So I think that's really key, and I think that ties in with that the bit about limited budget. It's making that content and budget go that little bit further and having more impact.
Yeah, and you know, talk about stakeholders and budget holders. I mean, a lot of times we're working with event managers, you know, who are kind of only responsible for that piece of an event. And really we need to be talking with the marketing people and the communications people, and it's more of a partnership. And when we do that, we're able to pull from other budgets. You know, we're not just draining an event budget, we're pulling in money from marketing because they see that this is a piece that's going to be used outside of the event. We're pulling in from communications because they have money, because they need to communicate with their employees. So again, it's like, yeah, there's strategy around that and how we approach it. And I think if we set the stage and say, hey, look, here's our content strategy for the 9 months in between the event, who else at your team internally can we help leverage to make this a partnership and share some of the burden of a budget?
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. The next question is, you guys can think about who wants to take this. Recently, I was at an event having the same topic. The conclusion was that the creativity is more related to the content and the format of the event. So what is a creative technology for you? Or are we speaking about innovative technology?
I'll take this because we were talking about this before at the coffee shop. So somebody referenced the Sphere in Las Vegas because you were at IMAX.
Yeah.
And you know, seeing it in person, it's insane, right? From the outside, from the inside, it feels almost like the uncanny valley where you're like, what, you know, it feels real, but it's not real. And then the closer you get, you realize how it's built, and that's purely technology, right? That's all that is. And just like any screen, any projector, anything, it's just a piece of hardware. But if you go in there, we did a behind the scenes tour of the Sphere, you know, as they were preparing for loading in. It's really weird to go in there and see it all as a blank canvas, because that's all that it really is, right? It's just a piece of technology. And so we talk about creativity. The creativity is everything that goes in and around and on that. So if you go there to see U2, you saw U2, you know that there's this whole journey that you take as somebody who's an attendee, and there's a museum piece, and there's a merch piece, and there's an F&B piece, all before you get into the actual space. And then you get into the space and you see these just jaw-dropping, insane visuals and creations and music and all of that. That's all the creativity, you know? And as a standalone piece of technology, yes, this big black dome, it looks really cool and big and impressive. But then when you start putting stuff on that blank canvas, that's when you really start seeing the potential. So I think that goes with any technology, you know? AI is a great example. As a standalone thing, it's just a piece of technology. But when you start really finding out how you can creatively make it work for you and what you can do with it, I think that's when you really unlock the potential of the tool.
Okay, great. Thank you. Julie, I think this next one is for you. Thinking about delegate engagement post-event, can you suggest creative ways to use tech to capture feedback? Surveys seem outdated and engagement with these are usually low.
I think we sort of look at the event apps in isolation currently. So you kind of you create one to support your event, and then it's quickly redundant. I think, you know, extending the life of those apps maybe is a way to do it in quite a cost-effective way. So I think, you know, we just need to think a little bit differently and a little bit longer about the life of an event and what we're doing, and utilising probably the technologies that we're using pre-event to capture information and keep interest and stimulation after the event as well.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions from the group? Okay, well then why don't we chat about kind of the key takeaways from each of you. If you wanted the audience to leave with one kind of thought, what would that be? So Julie, why don't you go first?
I think I've kind of said this, but just to reiterate, I think about all your event technology and think about joining it up. You know, I think I still see a lot of kind of manual stuff. I don't see a lot of automation. I think if we can just take that step to think differently about using each of those event tech pieces and how we're going to join them up holistically, not only to get the data, but also to improve the delegate experience, then I think that's probably my one takeaway. You know, you'll see today in the show, there's an amazing array of suppliers that you can work with, but it's joining them up and making sure that that experience is joined up for the delegate as well as post-event and using that.
I think my key takeaway is around that. A lot of it is around that budget and the sell to your stakeholders in getting their buy-in. And I think that's tied into demonstrating the value that technology and that experience can bring, and utilising what Julie was saying, that data is so powerful, but it's only powerful if you know what you want to do with it and how you analyse that data. And that data will then drive the way you then change your events to hopefully make them more resonate more with your delegates, land better and impactful and memorable. So I do think that there's going to be a shift in terms of us as agencies, how are we actually going to really analyse that and what that changes the event strategy for the future.
Great, thanks, Pat. Taylor?
So be smart and intentional, be willing to spend a little bit of money, but incrementally grow and be smart about that growth too. I think for me, it's just be meaningful, you know, make it mean something. talking about what have we learned coming out of. I promised myself I wouldn't use the P word many times, and we're trying to stay away from it. But what have we learned? I mean, I think for one thing, something that we've learned is that it's a big ask. We're giving people this flexibility of work from home and the virtual or hybrid option. And so if I'm going to get out of bed and get out of the house and get on a plane and come to an event and then sit down, and I don't feel like you as the event creator has honored that and given me something that means something to me, like, it's a waste of time. So I think the content and the experience needs to be meaningful, and whatever that means. Yes, you're still going to have financial updates, you're still going to have product updates and details and extremely long 8-point text disclaimers from legal at the bottom of your slides. Like, it's all going to be there, I get that. But there is a lot of time before and after that. If you think about the entire pre to post event experience, even in the room, there's hours and days of time. And so how are we going to be meaningful and intentional and make the content and experience mean something for the attendee who's going out of their way, leaving their family at home, and attending an experience?
I think that sounds great, and I hope that as an audience you got something out of our session today, session number 1. Thank you to Julie, Pat, and Taylor for your expertise and insight, and I thought it was very interesting, so I thank you all. And Katie, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Look, standout session. Every seat's gone. Thank you so much, everybody.
Except for that one guy who left about 5 minutes in. I'm going to go look for him right now.
If anyone's like me, just wants to go and lie down now after all that inspiration. So thank you very much, everybody, for the first session. Join us back here at 11 o'clock for using event technology to enhance your customer journey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.